So we are at part 3 of the Great Who, or the Great Who. Okay, that's my dyslexia. Here we go. The Great Philosophers Who Failed at Love by Andrew Shaffer. This actually helps me as somebody who does, deal with dyslexia a bit. It's helping me to exercise this. That's one of the reasons why I don't ever give up on books. I want to keep myself sharp. Um, so yeah, well, I was on my break the whole time, the entire time. I was just out there chilling, doing my thing, and then all that replayed in my brain was that song. It must have been love, but it's over now. Da 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 da. Ba, ba. Sorry, okay, I got lost there for a second, but you know what I mean. I don't know, and I feel like that's an excellent theme song for this. So, throw that on in the background if you need some theme music. As we go on to talk about Plato, right? And let's talk about Plato a little bit before I even dive into the book, right? So when we say that we're platonic with somebody, it's literally not romantic at all. It's friendly, platonic, right? Plato, he detested love, right? And you see that throughout all of his philosophies, all of his shit. It's very he's fuck love, And in fact, here's a direct quote from my boy Plato. Love is a serious mental disease. Cheers to that, brother. Few details are known about Greek philosopher Plato's love life, except that he died a lifelong bachelor at the age of 81. Fortunately, he left ample material on the relations between men and women, much of which appears disturbing to the modern reader. Take his idea of utopia as laid out in the Republic. In contrast to the modern concept of a utopia as a paradise or heaven on earth, Plato's utopia is a city run by the iron fist of the state. In Plato's utopia, marriages are arranged by the state based upon eugenic ideals. If inferior couples had children, the kids would be put away in some mysterious unknown place as they ought to be. And the children of the state-sponsored superior couples would also be taken away from their parents to be raised by the community. No child would ever know their parents, nor the parents them. That's fucked up, right? He's kind of a fucked up dude. Children would call every elder that they met mother or father, and everyone of a similar age brother or sister. To avoid the problems associated with private property, wives would not belong solely to their husbands. Instead, women shall be, without exception, the common wives of men, and no one shall have a wife of his own. How this common arrangement would affect the state-sponsored breeding program is unclear, although Plato makes it clear that women outside of the age range of 20 to 40 who found themselves pregnant would be required to have abortions or commit infanticide. While there was no room for romance in Plato's utopia, there was plenty of room for war. Boys and girls who showed an aptitude for fighting would be trained from an early age to be warriors. If they exhibited no skill for the art of war, a state-enforced division of labor would assist them in choosing a career path. This seems very Spartan-esque to me. He's got that whole Spartan mindset, people are machines, they don't need to feel things. The main goal of utopia was to achieve military superiority over states that would threaten its well-being, and maybe enough food to feed the masses. Philosopher Bertrand Russell wrote, "Skill in war and enough to eat is all that will be achieved." Plato had lived through famine and defeat in Athens. Perhaps subconsciously he thought the avoidance of these evils the best statesmanship could accomplish. See, that's kind of what I mean. He experienced war and famine, and so for him, his whole mindset is survival. How do we survive this? How do we move through this? Totally different time, totally different era. Things were very different. So how could we ever actually relate to the man? How could his philosophies really translate over to somebody like us? Yeah. Um, not in his own words. Platonic love. Today, the term platonic love is referred to intimate, non-sexual friendships, usually between heterosexual members of the opposite sex. The opinions of the characters in Plato's dialogues, by contrast, are often contradictory. In his masterworks, Phaedrus and Symposium, Plato paints a picture of love that is both physical and spiritual in nature. Plato identified the various forms of love as the love of God, the love of flesh, the love of self, the love of friend, the last of which gave rise to the modern day idea of Platonic love. Ayn Rand. Alright, this woman is somebody who stirs shit up. Okay, like she's gonna piss off everybody. Her libertarian agenda. I actually did enjoy The Fountainhead. Shoot me if you must. Okay, like it, caught me at a time in my life when I needed her philosophy. So shout out to my girl Ayn Rand. 1905 to 1982. Some women just weren't cut out for love, right? To say I love you, one must first know how to say the I. I like that. She was an excellent writer. I don't agree with all that she wrote about, but there's something to be said about her literary expression of her own mindset. See, I try to come from a very unbiased perspective when I read different content, because like with Plato and Aristotle, I'm not going to agree with these men, but they did have some wisdom, they did have some shit to teach. And that's something that I go into, like, with philosophy, like, it's kind of like science. Like, you have to have an unbiased nature. You have to just look at the information being presented and kind of, work with that. It's not really so much about the messenger. Philosophy is a whole thing. So, anyway. Russian American Ayn Rand, best known for her philosophical novels Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, believed that in order to love another person, one must first love oneself. Based upon the sordid details of her romantic life, Rand clearly loved herself with abandon. In 1955, after establishing herself as a best-selling novelist, the 50-year-old and married Rand began a workplace romance with a 25-year-old. Let me restart this, okay? My brain's like, wait, I can't speak. Okay, all right, reverse. All right, Russian. Okay. It's early. Russian-American Ayn Rand, best known for her philosophical novels Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, believed that in order to love another person, one must first love oneself. Based upon the sordid details of her romantic life, Rand clearly loved herself with abandon. In 1955, after establishing herself as a best-selling novelist, the 50-year-old and married Ayn Rand began a workplace romance with the 25-year-old Nathaniel Branden. After Branden wrote her a fan letter in 1950, Rand and her husband, Frank O'Connor, met with Branden and his fiancée, Barbara. The foursome quickly formed a tight-knit intellectual friendship when Nathaniel and Barbara married. Rand and O'Connor stood up for them as maid of honor and best man. Despite the 25-year gulf separating Branden and herself, Rand recognized in him a kindred philosophical spirit. Their shared belief in personal liberty, laissez-faire capitalism, and rationalism led them to confound the objectivist school of thought. Their movement rejected spirituality and altruism, instead praising reason and self-interest as the highest values. As Rand groomed Branden to be the intellectual heir to her life's work, they inadvertently fell in love. But this was no ordinary clandestine affair. After disclosing their feelings to each other, Rand and Branden pitched the idea of an affair to Branden's wife, Barbara. While Branden insisted that his feelings for Rand did not in any way change how he felt about about Barbara. His wife's visibly dazed state made it clear that things were not okay. When Rand's husband Frank walked in on the trio, Rand proceeded to explain their proposal to him. The persistence of a drill cutting through granite. After Barbara and Frank flared up in angry protest, Aang became still warmer, gentler, and more implacable. She acknowledged their feelings, conveyed compassion for their pain, and tried to make them accept the situation with the single-mindedness of a military commander. The oddest part of their talk is that at this time all they were proposing was an emotional affair. It's not as if we were proposing a sexual relationship, Rand said. They wished only to meet a few times a week in private to talk. Their spouses reluctantly agreed to the arrangement. To no one's surprise, Rand and Brandon began sleeping together 5 months later. She made love with the same single-tract concentration with which she did everything else, Brandon wrote. The sexual intensity of their relationship distracted Rand from her in-progress novel Atlas Shrugged. Have you been sent by the enemy to prevent me from finishing this book? She asked Brandon. She eventually finished her masterpiece in 1957, dedicating it to both her husband and her young lover. Brandon and his wife finally separated in 1965, but here the plot thickens. He was secretly seeing a beautiful young fashion model, Patricia Scott. Rand was unaware of his affair with Scott, but could feel Brandon pulling away from her emotionally. The man to whom I dedicated Atlas Shrugged would never want anything less than me. I don't care if I'm 90 years old and in a wheelchair, she berated him. When Brandon revealed his relationship with Patricia to Rand, the older woman went ballistic. My dog's kind of going ballistic back there. Rand, deeming him unfit to continue his role as her intellectual heir, publicly exiled Brandon from the objectivist movement that they had built together. You would have been nothing without me, she screamed in a fit of rage, and you will be nothing when I'm done with you. She had his name removed from the dedication page of subsequent printings of Atlas Shrugged and tried to block publication of Brandon's own book, The Psychology of Self-Help. Rand's husband stood stoically by her side during the fallout with Brandon, and despite its ups and downs, their marriage lasted over 50 years until Frank's death in 1979. In her own words, love as I say, not as I do. So, this kind of goes to show how karma kind of works, you know? You cheat on a person, you get cheated on, you know? You do something like that, you know? And typically, if you're with somebody who's willing to cheat on somebody with you, they're willing to cheat on you, and that's something that you have to kind of understand going into that connection, right? If somebody were to do something like that, you know, you have to go into that connection fully aware that, like, this person is not somebody who's honorable, who's trustworthy. This is not, you know, this isn't somebody that you really can invest all of that into, unless you fully accept that that's your fate, and that's just how it is, that this person is not cut out to be your monogamous partner, you know. Rand tiptoed around the issue of infidelity in a 1964 Playboy interview with Alvin Toffler. I consider promiscuity immoral, not because sex is evil, but because sex is too good and too important. When she was asked if only married partners should have sex, she said, not necessarily. What sex should involve is a very serious relationship. I consider marriage a very important institution, but either married or unmarried sex is moral, provided only that both parties take the relationship seriously and that it is based on values. And I completely agree with that, actually. Like I said, some shit we agree on, other shit we don't really agree on. Jean-Jacques Rousseau 1712 to 1778. Alright, look at that hat. Fancy hat. What is true love itself if it is not illusion? If we saw what we loved exactly as it is, there would be no more love on earth. French Enlightenment philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that humankind's natural state had been corrupted by society. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. He wrote, but human nature does not go backwards, and we never return to the times of innocence and equality, when we have once departed from them. Political instruments such as marriage are necessary chains that we must voluntarily submit to. The nuclear family, built around the core of a husband and a wife, is integral to the cohesiveness of society. His private life could not have been any further from his publicly stated philosophies. Rousseau engaged in many romantic relationships and ignored his filial responsibilities when they arose. The nuclear family, that necessary straitjacket that all men must wear, did not fit Rousseau. In his autobiography, he recounted his relationships with upper-class women such as Madame de l'Orange, Madame de Savoy, Madame de Vorons. The noblewoman Veron took him into her home, where Rousseau lived with her and the steward of her house in an illicit ménage à trois. Rousseau considered Veron the love of his life, but they eventually parted ways when he took a job in another city. Despite his dalliances with high society, Rousseau's longest relationship was with Thérèse Levitator. Okay, that's a word. I'm just kidding. An illiterate seamstress. Okay, with a name like that, how can you be illiterate? Okay, like, I feel illiterate trying to say that. Levasseur. Okay. An illiterate seamstress whom he met in March 1745. They had 5 children together, a sizable family, or it would have been if they had kept any of their offspring. Rousseau personally abandoned every one of their 5 children to a French foundling hospital, sort of like a YMCA for unwanted children. The kids would have otherwise interfered with Rousseau's important philosophical work, he argued. Neither Rousseau nor Levavasseur were faithful to each other, but after abandoning their 5th and final child in 1768, they decided to marry. The marriage was not legal, though, as unions between Catholics, Rousseau, and Protestants, Levavasseur, were not recognized in France at the time. That appeared to be fine with Rousseau, who barely acknowledged Levavasseur in any way. Instead of referring to her as his wife, he preferred to call her his housekeeper. He kept her services until his death in 1778. In his own words, "Spank you very much." Rousseau's sexual proclivities were thoroughly documented as in Confessions. His posthumously published autobiography, his appetites were in stark contrast to the conventional moral code that he championed in his philosophical writings. The most salacious passages featuring candid admissions of his various fetishes, including masochism, spanking, and flashing. On S&M, to fall at the feet of an imperious mistress, obey her mandates, or implore pardon, were for me the most exquisite enjoyments, and the more my blood was inflamed by the efforts of a lively imagination, the more I acquired the appearance of a whining lover. On spanking, my governess, Miss Lambercier, I don't know if I'm saying that accurately, obviously, had often threatened us with spanking, and this threat of a treatment entirely new appeared to me extremely dreadful. But after the execution, I found it much less terrible than the idea. And what is peculiar, this punishment increased my affection for the person who had influenced it. Who would believe this childish discipline received at 8 years old from the hands of a woman of 30 should influence my propensities, my desires, my passions for the rest of my life? And that in quite a contrary sense from what might naturally have been expected. On flashing, I haunted dark alleys and lonely spots where I could expose myself to women. The absurd pleasure I got from displaying myself before their eyes was quite indescribable. The more sensible pretended that they had seen. The more sensible pretended that they had seen nothing, and others started laughing. Damn, son. All right, we all got our shit right. Bertrand Russell, 1872 to 1970. All right, that's what this guy looks like. Marriage is for most women the commonest mode of livelihood, and the total amount of undesired sex endured by women is probably greater in marriage than in prostitution. Bertrand Russell was an Englishman of many talents, working alternately as a philosopher, logician, yep, a mathematician, a social reformer, and a historian. His history of Western philosophy provided a foundation for all future philosophy surveys, including his book. Russell won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950 in recognition of his varied and significant writings in which he champions humanitarian ideals and freedom of thought. And if such an award existed, he would have also been awarded for the medal for most marriages by a renowned philosopher. Russell believed that bad marriages were especially destructive to creative types such as himself. When an artist is compelled by fear of social and economic persecution to go on living in a marriage which has become intolerable, he is deprived the energy which artistic creation requires. They argued passionately for the right to divorce, likening a bad marriage to a prison. Over his time, Russell broke free from 3 such matrimonial prisons. Why did he get married then? Whatever. At the age of 22, he married Alice Pearsall Smith, wife number 1. Their union lasted nearly 27 years. And next, he married Dora Winifred Black, wife number 2, in 1921. Wait. Hold on. Okay. This was an open marriage. Both partners were free to engage in sexual relations outside of the marriage. When Dora became pregnant by another man in 1935, Russell considered their pact broken and divorced her. 1 year later, he married Patricia Peter Spence, wife number 3, and divorced her in 1952. Russell also engaged in adulterous relationships with at least 2 married women. He believed that as long as the relationship is profoundly important and there are no children to be affected, adultery should not be subject to criminal, civic, or public condemnation. Russell did not regret his time spent with various women. As he wrote in autobiography, "It seems to me that men need women and women need men, mentally as much as physically. For my part, I owe a great deal to women whom I have loved, and without them I should have been far more narrow-minded." Russell lived his life for 3 things: the longing for love, the search for knowledge, and the unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. After a lifetime of searching, he at least found lasting love. He at last found lasting love. When he was 80, he settled down for good, at 80, with Edith Finch, wife number 4, although she was 30 years his junior. They had known each other for over 25 years. Though it might seem too good for human life, this is at last what I have found. He lived with Finch until he died at the age of 98. In his own words, "Ah, youth, Marriage and Morals, published in 1929, summarized Russell's early thoughts on the subject of marriage. He foresaw a future where fathers were less important as the heads of household. With fathers out of the way, single mothers roaming the earth, Russell believed that governments would take over the education and welfare of citizens, thereby paving the way for the complete collapse of Western civilization. Well, he's not completely wrong. 3 divorces, and some 50 years later, he admitted to erring in his judgment. I do not know what I think now about the subject of marriage. Perhaps easy divorce causes less unhappiness than any other system, but I am no longer capable of being dogmatic on the subject of marriage. Jean-Paul Sartre. Ooh, we already talked about his lady, and now here we go. Let's talk about the guy. All right, 1905 to 1980. There are, of course, ugly women, but I prefer those who are pretty. French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre was an unlikely candidate for a literary Don Juan, as he liked to call himself. The first girl that he became infatuated with in school rejected him, calling him a cross-eyed old fool. It was an inauspicious introduction to the opposite sex. His prospects did not look any more promising as an adult. He stood just 5'1", dressed in oversized clothes, and had no concept of personal hygiene. Sartre miraculously overcame these deficiencies by simply ignoring them and projecting an aura of confidence. He admitted that as a youth, I was very melancholy because I was ugly, and that made me suffer. I've absolutely rid myself of that because it's weakness. He only needed one thing to seduce women. Lamotte's words. He lost his virginity at the age of 18 to an older married woman. I did it with no great enthusiasm, he said, because she wasn't very pretty. It was okay for him to be ugly, but Sartre held the woman he slept with to a higher standard. In a similar vein, he felt no respect for prostitutes because a girl shouldn't give herself like that. Yet he regularly visited brothels with his university friends, giving himself like that. What are the odds? Hypocrisy at its finest. I think it's so humorous when people, like slut shame, like sex workers and things like that, or just people in general, because it almost always is from people who have promiscuous tendencies or behaviors, and it's like, that's, what you see in other people tends to be harbored within your own heart. So, people who are sitting there like, they're the worst. Why would they give their bodies up like that? And this guy's like giving it up to a new chick every other day. Where's his self-respect? Where's his morality? Oh, wait, no, he's not a woman. He's not held to any moral standards, right? His dick is just his dick, right? No, fuck that. Okay, anyway, back to the story. When Sartre was 21, he fell in love with Germaine Morin and requested her hand in marriage. Her parents originally consented, but called the wedding off when Sartre failed his teaching exam in the summer of 1928. I was relieved, Sartre wrote. I'm not sure of having acted quite correctly in this whole affair. In fact, he had not been acting correctly during his engagement. He had been having an affair with Simone Jolivet, a playwright and actress who lived in a nearby city of Toulouse. When Sartre presented Jolivet with a bottle of perfume, he was miffed that she placed it on her nightstand beside 4 other bottles from 4 other lovers. What? Do you own me? What? Do you own me? She said angrily. Am I supposed to sit here and wait for your occasional appearances in Toulouse? After thinking it over, Sartre agreed with her. She was right, of course, and I knew it. I concluded that jealousy is possessiveness. Therefore, I decided to never be jealous again. In 1929, while studying for his second attempt at his teaching certification, Sartre met a fellow philosophy student who shared his values, Simone de Beauvoir. Remember her? We talked about her earlier in the story. The long and winding road from their meeting to their burial in a shared Parisian grave is recounted earlier in this book at page 31. But suffice it to say that the open nature of their relationship allowed Sartre the freedom to sleep around as he pleased. His burgeoning literary fame as a playwright, novelist, screenwriter, and critic guaranteed him a constant stream of young ladies who were eager to make his acquaintance. Sartre's love life was not without drama. He often saw several different women concurrently, booking them into separate slots during his busy schedule. It's amazing that he ever found the time to write. The details of his various liaisons is dizzying, but here's a taste from Hazel Rowley's Sartre Beauvoir biography. I don't know. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Tit for tat. I don't know. His women all lived within 10 minutes of him. They rarely saw one another, and none of them knew the truth about his life. Arlette had no idea that after going for 3 weeks vacation every year with her, Sartre went away with Wanda for 2 or 3 weeks. Wanda did not know that Sartre still saw Michel when he slept at Beauvoir's. He told Wanda he was sleeping at home. His letters to Wanda were filled with outrageous inventions. He'd be late back to Paris. He once told her he was locked up in a castle in Austria. He continued to live out his promiscuous dream right up until the end of his life in 1979. At the age of 74, a toothless, blind Sartre remarked to one of his girlfriends that, not counting Beauvoir and her girlfriend Sylvie Levant, there are 9 women in my life at the moment. Not a bad ending for a cross-eyed old fool. Oh, dude, that's kind of poetic though. I gotta give him that. He did get the last laugh. He got rejected one harsh time, and he got the last laugh on that. I gotta give him that. I do. Okay. In his own words, Sartre's crabs. Okay, that's a risk, guys. When he was 32, Jean-Paul Sartre was plagued by a bad case of crabs, as he told John Garrissy in 1979 or 71. Sorry. After I took mescaline, I started seeing crabs around me all the time. 3 or 4 of them followed me in the streets into class. I got used to them. I would wake up in the morning and say, "Good morning, my little ones. How did you sleep?" I would talk to them all the time. I would say, "Okay, guys, we're going to class now, so we gotta be still and quiet." And they would be there on my desk, absolutely still, until the bell rang. The crabs stayed with me until the day I simply decided that they bored me, and that I just wouldn't pay attention to them. Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860. A very mindful guy. Got a handful of mind. Look at that. Look at him catching a handful of his own mind. Love is the only species will for survival. The need to propagate the Love is only the species will for survival. The need to propagate the species. This goes to the argument. This is also kind of scientific, where love is just a chemical reaction in the brain, and once that chemical reaction stops occurring, then it is replaced with something else. It's replaced with a kind of a sense like this person is kind of like there, but it's not going to be that same honeymoon phase where you're getting all that norepinephrine in the beginning, you know. That shit does die down, you know. So it makes sense. The great German pessimist Arthur Schopenhauer knew exactly what he wanted in a woman. A certain plumpness and a full female bosom has an uncommon charm. Unfortunately, he believed that he did not have what women were looking for in exchange. According to Schopenhauer, all women want a man. 30 to 35 years of age, lack of brains is of no consequence to a woman. Rather, excessive mental power or even genius being in an abnormality may operate unfavorably. Therefore, we often see an ugly, stupid, and rude man cut out with a well-bred, talented, and amiable man. In the end, it meant little to Schopenhauer because all romantic affairs were doomed anyway. After he has finally obtained satisfaction, every lover will experience a wonderful disappointment, Schopenhauer wrote. After the final completion of the great work, every lover finds himself deceived, for the illusion has vanished. That's the end of that honeymoon phase, right? When the chemical stop bouncing around in your fucking synapses and neuroreceptors and all that shit. It's like finally your brain's resettling into its normal state of being. And once that, it's like that's why a lot of people are in love with being in love, right? They're chasing that high, they chase that moment, and they know it goes, it's fleeting, it's whatever. And you know, it's kind of like let me put it to you this way, okay? Some people, they spend their life trying to get one career that they can be in for the rest of their life, retire and whatever. Other people can be like a jack of all trades and not feel cut out for just one line of work, but many lines of work and wanting to work in many different fields because they get overwhelmed or burnt out in a certain field and they need a change of scene, they need a change of environment, they need a change of skill, they need something more different. Right? So already we're seeing the psychology here between two different mindsets, right? And the same goes for love, right? Some people want just like marriage, the whole nuclear family, the kids, the dogs, the whole thing, and that's fine for them. But other people want love, right? They want that feeling, they want that excitement, they want that arousal in their soul, right? And and when that dissipates, that can be kind of devastating, you know, on a psychological level. It can be pretty devastating when that dissipates. And some people just simply let it end there, you know? And I feel like that was kind of the case here. He completed at least one great work, fathering a child with a maid in Dresden. There's no historical record of the woman's or child's names. We know about them only from letters that Schopenhauer sent to his sister. Their relationship was apparently confined to a one-night stand. His daughter died as an infant in 1819, and he never saw the maid again. Although this was the only child he was to have, Schopenhauer believed that a man can conveniently beget more than 100 children a year, if as many women were at his disposal. In 1821, the 30-year-old philosopher began seeing a 19-year-old opera singer, Caroline Richter, an affair notable because she was one of the few women who returned his affections. Schopenhauer sabotaged their relationship with his dim views of marriage, which gave new meaning to fear of commitment. Marrying means to have one's rights and double one's duties. Needless to say, Caroline left Schopenhauer, and what would be his final attempt at romance. Schopenhauer, at the age of 43, turned his attentions to the 17-year-old Flora Weiss. He approached her at a party bearing a bunch of grapes. Apparently, roses were out of the price range for a part-time philosopher. The feelings were not mutual. As Flora recorded in her diary, I didn't want the grapes because old Schopenhauer had touched them. Schopenhauer, lonely and bitter, longed for the restoration of woman to her rightful and natural position, the subordinate one. That son of a bitch. Okay, this is what you download, okay? Alright. Mankind can't expect too much from the fairer sex. The most eminent heads of the entire sex have proved incapable of a single truly great, genuine, and original achievement in art, or indeed of creating anything at all of lasting value, he wrote in his masterpiece of Misogynies on women. We can say that by candidly publishing such sentiments before the whole world, he was not helping his chances with women. Philosophical lecturer Alexander S. Rosenthal said Schopenhauer died alone in 1860. Perhaps it's for the best that he never married. While he was unhappy being single, he predicted that he would have been far more miserable in matrimony. I would also like to make mention about this. Like, okay, so a lot of these people in this book who died alone or had these like horrible relationships or whatever, they're all misogynists, right? They're philosophers of misogyny. They like literally like taught on the evils of being a woman. Like, you're born evil if you have a vagina, right? And it's like they grew up with this mindset. And if you have no love and respect for people, how the fuck are you gonna get that in return? How the fuck? How the fuck? Exactly, you ain't. You ain't. So, when gratified, marriages lead more often to unhappiness than to happiness. For its demands often conflict so strongly with the personal welfare of the interested. After having children, love vanishes and leaves behind a hated companion for life. Who marries for love must live in grief, says a Spanish proverb. In his own words, Jack and Jill went up a hill. Arthur Schopenhauer contemplated love only with great reluctance, as a dearth of philosophical inquiry into the subject forced him to contemplate it. One ought rather to wonder that a matter which plays such an important part throughout human life has been hitherto scarcely at all taken into consideration by philosophers, Schopenhauer wrote. Next to love of life, romantic love proves the strongest and most active of all incentives. Continually engages half the powers and thoughts of the younger portion of humanity. Is the last goal of almost every human endeavor. Gains influence over the most important affairs. Interrupts at every hour the most serious occupations. And balances, at times, even the greatest mind. Nothing is at stake but that every Jack may find his Jill. Why should such a trifle play such an important part, and unceasingly bring disturbance and confusion into the well-regulated affairs of life? Seneca the Younger. Alright. They get better dressed every time. So, this fool lived during the time of Jesus, from 4 BC to 65 AD. He was here before and after Jesus, actually. Friendship always benefits. Love sometimes injures. Roman philosopher Seneca the Younger was banished from Rome in AD 4 on charges of adultery with Emperor Claudius's niece, Julia Livia, proving that love does, in fact, sometimes injure. This is especially true when that love is between a 40-year-old man and a 20-year-old married princess. After living in exile on the island of Corsica for 8 years, Seneca returned in 49 at the behest of the emperor's wife and Julia's sister, Agrippina. Okay, whatever. In 50, Seneca married a wealthy woman, Pompeia Paulina, and began tutoring Agrippa's son, Nero. When Nero assumed the Roman throne in 54, Seneca became his political advisor. Nero's tumultuous 14-year rule on the throne was marked by paranoia and persecution, among other atrocities. He executed his own mother, Agrippina. Seneca could not control the emperor and stood in silent witness to his reign of terror before retiring from his post after 8 years of service. After Seneca admitted to plotting to overthrow the emperor in 65, Nero ordered the philosopher and his co-conspirators to commit suicide. Damn. He's like, I ain't killing you, you do it. According to Roman historian Tacitus, Seneca told his wife not to allow his death to be a permanent burden, rather to take genuine consolation for the loss of her husband in the contemplation of his virtuous life. Paulina assured him that she had every intention of dying with him and demanded a share of the fatal knife. Seneca, by no means averse to her having her moment of glory, said, I offered you the comfort of life. You have chosen the dignity of death. I shall not deny you the chance to show such an example. Then they sliced open the veins in their arms with a single stroke of the knife. Seneca had already withered away from fasting and had a difficult time getting the blood flow from his wrist. He asked his wife, who was bleeding from her own wounds, to leave the room. Seneca then asked his doctor to administer poison to administer poison to him to speed up his death. The poison also failed to kill him. Damn, God was like, nope, you're living with this. He was next placed into a hot bath where the steam finally suffocated him. Nero, meanwhile, heard that Paulina had slit her wrists, and he ordered her arms to be bandaged and for doctors to keep her alive. She survived her suicide attempt, but was faithful to her husband's memory to a most praiseworthy degree, the pallor of her face and body testifying to the extent of which her soul had been destroyed. Holy fuck. That gave me a little anxiety reading that, actually. Not gonna lie. In his own words, bet you can't have just one. Seneca the Younger satirized the relaxed morals that he saw as poisoning the well of Roman society. Can anyone feel ashamed of adultery now that things have come to such a pass that no woman keeps a husband at all unless it is to be unless it be to pique her lover? Chastity merely implies ugliness. Where will you find any woman so abject, so repulsive as to be satisfied with a single pair of lovers, without having a different one for each hour of the day? Nor is a day long enough for all of them, unless she has taken her airing in the grounds of one, and passes the night with another. Despite being a work of satire, it is difficult to read his words here without being reminded of the cause of his exile. Okay, so Roman and Egyptian lifestyles were actually really similar. So they didn't have like the same what is that word? Adversity to to sexual endeavors, right? They were all kind of like, yeah, sex exists, people have it, get over it, It was the rest of the world that was kind of like, and then when the Catholics, like the Roman Catholics, kind of rose up, and then that kind of shifted. But pre-Christian era Romans were pretty like Egyptian, and think about like Julius Caesar and shit. Like they're not like moral or like monogamous by any means. Socrates. All the boys is on this book. Okay. So from 469 to 399 BC. Here's what this face looks like. Very admirable beard. I don't know how he died alone. By all means, marry. If you get a good wife, you'll become happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher. The same could be true, or the same could be said about husbands, I suppose. The Greek philosopher, as we've read in the book, we've got the ladies up in here too. There ain't just men. The Greek philosopher Socrates was a squat man with a snub nose and projecting eyes. What a way to describe him. He wandered the streets of Athens, engaging strangers in random philosophical conversations. Despite his old appearance in behavior, Socrates was well known and liked throughout the Greek city-state. A bachelor for most of his life, he finally married when he was in his 50s or 60s. His wife, the fiery Xanthippe, sure I'm saying that right, was, by some accounts, up to 40 years younger than Socrates. In stark contrast to the submissive lives that women were expected to lead in ancient Greece, Xanthippe publicly berated her elderly husband, according to one legend. After a heated verbal exchange between the couple, Xanthippe poured dirty water from a pail onto her husband's head. Socrates knew that he had it coming to him, joking that it generally rains after thunder. Socrates took his wife's behavior in stride. As I intended to associate with all kinds of people, I thought nothing they could do would disturb me. Once I had accustomed myself to bear the disposition of Xanthippe. And he said Xanthippe's reputation as a nagging wife is now permanently embedded in the history books. Shakespeare invoked her name as a cursed and shrewd woman in The Taming of the Shrew. In 399 BC, Socrates was put on trial for corrupting the youth of Athens with his philosophy. They disputed the spurious charges at his trial, but refused to beg for mercy. He even promised to continue practicing philosophy should the court find him not guilty. The jury convicted him and sentenced him to death. Faced with the prospect of raising 3 children alone, Xanthippe was understandably upset. On the day Socrates was a sentence was to be carried out, she wept profusely in front of his friends who were visiting him. "Please, let someone take her home," Socrates said to his friend Crichton. All other women were banished from his bedside. Socrates believed that a deathbed was no place for mourning. Surrounded by his male friends and students, he drank a cup of hemlock, a poisonous European plant. Tears started to flow down his usually stoic friends' faces. "You are strange fellows. What is wrong with you?" The incredulous Socrates said, "I sent the woman away for this very purpose, to stop their creating such a scene. I have heard that one should die in silence, so please be quiet and keep control of yourselves." Socrates walked around to allow the poison to work its way through his system. Finally lying down, when his extremities started going numb, he directed his last words to Crichton. "We owe a cock to Asclepius. Do pay it. Don't forget." In his own words, "He's just not that into you." Over the course of several meetings, the Athenian youth, Alcibiades, I'm sure I said that right, tried to seduce the elder Socrates. While Socrates was no stranger to sleeping with young men, he had no interest in engaging in physical activity with this particular youth. When they wrestled each other in the nude, Socrates remained unaroused. I came to realize that he was far more invulnerable in every way to bribery than Ajax had been to the sword, Alcibiades said. Socrates gently chided the boy, believing that Alcibiades did not possess the maturity to appreciate the older philosopher's intellect. You must perceive me in a sort of incredible beauty. You must perceive in me a sort of incredible beauty, but of a kind, I mean, very different from your own good looks. You wish to make a trade, beauty for beauty. Well, that's really the old gold for bronze exchange. Emmanuel Swedenborg, 1688 to 1772. A man knows that love is, but not what it is. And here's this face. It is quite understandable that Swedish philosopher Emanuel Swedenborg knew not what love is. Over the course of his 84 years, he had zero experience with it. The lifelong bachelor passed his time on earth by writing about love, marriage, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the subject of sexual frustration. Swedenborg believed that thwarted sexual impulses did more harm to society than premarital sex, since with some men the love of the sex cannot without harm be restrained from going forth into fornication. There is no need to recount the injuries which excessive restraint of the love of women may cause with those who suffer from the most intense venereal excitement. His own repressed urges led to vivid erotic dreams, which he recorded in a diary from 1743 to 1744. One of his more lurid dreams involved a menage a trois with two women, one older and one younger than him. Which woman should he make love to first? Swedenborg believed that the dream represented a dilemma that he faced in his writings. Should he continue with his older intellectual work or go down a new spiritual path? He chose the younger woman, thus deciding the direction of his theological studies. The 56-year-old Swedenborg dove headfirst into his new spiritual endeavor, believing that he could speak to dead people. He started carrying out full conversations with the dearly departed, the elaborate hallucinations that fueled his writing. I am well aware that many will say that no one can possibly speak with spirits and angels as long as he lives in the body, he wrote. Swedenborg published his divinely inspired riffs on love in his bestseller, Conjugal Love. He defined conjugal love as spiritual love. Unlike other theologians, he embraced the concept of premarital sex. The spiritual is, in fact, actually evolved out of the natural, and when the spiritual has been evolved, then the natural compasses it about as bark does the wood, and as the sheath the sword. Besides, he argued, earthly marriage has one specific goal: reproduction, in order to fill heaven with new citizens. Although premarital sex should be discouraged, heaven can always use more angels. On his deathbed, Swedenborg was witnessed talking to angels in the room with him as if they were living people. A pastor asked him why no one else could see spirits. The 84-year-old virgin replied that it was because most people are so carnally minded. The angels graced Swedenborg with their presence because of his chastity of both body and mind. The joy of angel sex. Emanuel Swedenborg's direct line to God allowed him to observe something that few mortals are privy to: the bedroom habits of angels. Marriage, it turns out, does not end in death. In death do we part. Swedenborg wrote that husbands who have loved their wives in case they die are desirous to know whether it be well with them and whether they shall ever meet again. Married couples do meet up in heaven, and if their love is good and true, they can continue to live together as man and wife, enjoying similar communication with each other as in the world, but more delightful and blessed, i.e., no more arguments over trivial matters such as dishes and yard work. If a couple continues to feud in this spiritual realm for whatever reason, that is easily remedied. A new angel spouse will be provided. Heavenly love between the sexes consists not of carnal pleasures, but of celestial sweets. The real angel bearing a trumpet told Swedenborg that sex exists in the heavens as on earth, but only with those in the heaven who are in the marriage of good and truth. Henry David Thoreau. Dude, I'm telling you, all the boys are in this book. Man, I feel like all my heroes died alone. Fuck. Alright. Henry David Thoreau, 1817 to 1862. If common sense had been consulted, how many marriages would never have taken place? My boy, there he is. Alright. Cheers to that one. Fuck. Alright. Let me relax my face for a second. I've been talking for a minute. Alright, I'm better. Okay. My face is starting to cramp. So, American naturalist Henry David Thoreau lived a simple life in and near the woods, where he was free from the trivialities of modern society. The mind can be permanently profaned by the habit of attending to trivial things, so that all our thoughts shall be tinged with triviality, he wrote. For a naturalist, Thoreau's views on sexuality were surprisingly conservative. Love and lust are far asunder, he wrote. The one is good and the other bad. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't always agree with these philosophers, okay? In a perfect world, sex would be treated naturally and simply. There is far more purity, as well as more impurity than is apparent. Pure love, when founded on mutual respect, elevates base pleasure to loftier delights. Such mutual delights would not come easily for Thoreau. He was ideally suited for solitary living, since he was as ugly as sin, long-nosed, queer-mouthed, and with uncouth and rustic, though courteous manners, corresponding very well with his exterior. According to neighbor Nathaniel Hawthorne, Thoreau's uncouth manners included eating with his hands, rarely bathing, and wearing shabby clothes. In 1839, Thoreau and his brother John both fell in love with the same girl, family friend Ellen Sewall. Her father, a Unitarian minister, did not approve of either of the young Thoreau boys. John proposed to Ellen first. She rejected him. Henry tried his hand next, proposing to her in a letter. Although the letter has not survived, a journal entry dated November 1st, 1840, likely used similar language. I thought that the sun of our love should have risen as noiselessly as the sun out of the sea. In spite of its flowery prose, or perhaps because of it, Henry's marriage proposal also met with a swift refusal. Following the rejected proposal, Henry wrote, "Love is the profoundest of secrets, divulged even to the beloved. It is no longer love." He was infatuated with other women throughout his life, but he never fell in love again. He wrote that it is rare indeed that we meet the one to whom we are prepared to be quite ideally related, as she is to us. Thoreau never married because, in his mind at least, Sewall was the one for him. In his own words, thoroughly modern Henry. Some scholars have theorized that Thoreau was a repressed homosexual. No biographical study of the writer is complete without addressing the likelihood that even while in the forest, Thoreau was in the closet. Boise Weekly columnist Nicholas Callias wrote, Thoreau had a fondness for watching nude male swimmers, maintained a large library of homoerotic classical literature, and wrote sexually charged journal entries about muscular male bodies and phallic-shaped plants. His actions and words indicate a specific sexual interest in members of his own sex. Scholar Walter Harding wrote in the aptly named Journal of Homosexuality. So, I mean, let's be fair. Perhaps that was the deal. There was probably... You know what I've noticed is, within, at least the gay people I know, they can look at a girl and be like, oh, she's attractive, she's cool, we connect, we can talk, we can do all those things, but when it comes down to brass tacks, having an actual relationship is, no-go, right? It's just, it ain't working. And so, I would think that, it was probably kind of like that for him. He could see women as attractive. He could be like, oh, I like them, da-da-da-da-da. But when it came down to brass tacks, he's like, but I like the man, All right. Leo Tolstoy, from 1828 to 1910. Show you this handsome man Look at him. He looks like fucking Merlin. Where's your wand, Merlin? Love does not exist. There exists the physical need for the intercourse and the rational need for a mate in life. Russian author Leo Tolstoy's first sexual experience was with a prostitute when he was just 14 years old. His brother took him to a brothel to inaugurate Tolstoy into manhood. After having sex with the prostitute, Tolstoy broke down in tears, an inauspicious introduction to sexuality that would set the tone for the rest of his life. His first adult relationship was with a 23-year-old serf, Aksenia Alexandrovna Bazikna. Tolstoy. By then, in his 20s, wrote that he was in love as never before. He became very attached to Aksenia, but marriage between a master and a serf was not a legitimate option in Russian society, never mind the fact that she was already married. They had a child together, Timothy. It fucks with my head to even say it like that. Okay. Who he never publicly acknowledged. Still, Tolstoy longed for a family of his own. I must get married this year or not at all. Tolstoy's New Year resolution from 1859 read. The year passed without any wedding bells. Then, in 1862, when he was 34, a trio of sisters piqued his interest. His first choice of wife was the youngest sister, Tatiana. Their mother would not relinquish the 16-year-old to Tolstoy. She wanted Liza, the oldest sister, married off first. Tolstoy was unimpressed with Liza. How beautifully unhappy she would be if she were in my life, Tolstoy wrote. Tolstoy made a novel compromise. He proposed to the middle sister, Sophia Andreevna Burst. Sophia Andreevna Burst. Okay, she was plain and vulgar to his eyes, but attractive nonetheless. He told Sophia that her youth and vivacity made him all too aware of his own age and incapacity for happiness. While this was clearly a terrible pickup line, his interest in her was enough to set Sophia's heart aflutter. They were not even sufficiently well acquainted to know whether they liked one another. Probably they never did. In biography, A.N. Wilson wrote, he found her strange and fascinating. She found him monstrous and frightening. On their wedding day, Tolstoy showed his diaries to his bride, revealing his world of prostitutes, promiscuity, gonorrhea, and homoerotic thoughts in unflinching detail. I don't think I ever recovered from the shock of reading the diaries when I was engaged to him. Sophia wrote years later, I can still remember the agonizing pangs of jealousy. Sophia cried the rest of the day, including throughout their wedding ceremony. After the service, when she hugged her mother, Tolstoy chastised her. If leaving your family means such a great sorrow to you, then you cannot love me very much. Kind of a narcissist, doesn't he? While he believed that chastity was man's ideal state, sex within marriage for the explicit purpose of procreation was a close second, i.e. no birth control for the Tolstoys. Famous for massive novels such as the 4-volume, 1,225-page Great War and Peace, Tolstoy set about building an equally impressive family. The couple would have a total of 13 children, of which only 8 survived childhood. Thankfully, his books sold well, allowing his entire family to live comfortably on a large estate. The couple had their fair share of arguments over the years, most of which were recounted in gruesome detail in Sophia's diaries and in Tolstoy's thinly veiled autobiographical novels. Their troubles were only heightened when, toward the end of his life, Tolstoy became fanatically religious and swore off his earthly existence. He moved into a hut on his family's property while his wife and children continued to live in their mansion. When he tried to renounce copyright to all of his works, Sophia went ballistic as she needed the income from his works to support their family. Sophia was unwilling to accept her husband's callousness. I want to kill myself, to fall in love with someone, anything, only not to live with a man whom I have loved all my life. She wrote, her various suicide attempts and threats included poisoning, opium, ammonia, lying down on train tracks, throwing herself into a well, and freezing herself to death in a bed of snow in the dead of winter. She never succeeded. Tolstoy was unmoved by his wife's actions. If anyone would wish to drown, it is certainly not she, but I. Let her know that I desire only one thing, freedom from her, he wrote in a letter to one of his children. Wow. Wow. One night, Tolstoy abruptly left his hut for good. In a note addressed to his wife of 48 years, he wrote, I'm doing what people of my age very often do, giving up the world in order to spend my last days alone and in silence. I do not think that I have left home because I do not love you. I love and pity you with... He just said, I do not love you, and then he's like, I love and pity you with all my heart, but I cannot do otherwise than I am doing. Tolstoy, already in ill health, died in a railroad station 10 days after leaving home. Far from being alone and in silence, he was flanked by hundreds of onlookers, journalists, the film crew, and his wife. Forgive me, she told him beside his death bench. I have never loved anyone but you. In his own words, the honeymoon's over. Like I said about that honeymoon phase, you already know. Tolstoy's wife, Sophia, transcribed Tolstoy's wife, Sophia, transcribed his novel, The Kreutzer Sonata, by hand. This task was assuredly uncomfortable for her because of the ways in which the details mirrored her marriage to Tolstoy. Cold hostility was our normal state. We had spats about the coffee, the tablecloth, the carriage, games of cards, trifles in short, which could not be of the least importance to either of us. All husbands who live the married life that I lived must either resort to outside debauchery or separate from their wives or kill themselves or kill their wives. I think we reached the end, but let's talk about the timeline a bit. Alright, so if we did it in chronological order to how these stories happen. 350 BC, Diogenes the Cynic, believing... Oh wait, nope, it's not in chronological order. I thought... Alright, let's continue. 350 BC, Diogenes the Cynic, believing that what is natural cannot be wrong, farts, urinates, defecates, and masturbates in public. That should be a song. I feel like men are amused, women are horrified. 60 BC, Titus Lucretius ingests a love potion which drives him insane. Yeah, that was mushroom tea. 41. Seneca the Younger is banished from Rome for sleeping with a married Roman princess. 385. St. Augustine of Hippo ends his engagement to a 10-year-old girl after a heavenly voice persuades him to lead a life of celibacy. 1118. Peter Abelard abandons his wife Heloise to a convent so that he can spend more time on his studies. Her protective uncle castrates him. 1250. St. Thomas Aquinas' family hires a prostitute to seduce him. Aquinas chases her away with a hot firebrand. 1540. John Calvin's engagement to a young German-speaking woman is called off when she fails to learn French. 1634. René Descartes has sex with a maid, fathering an illegitimate child. It is the first and last time he has ever had sex. 1766. Nicholas Champfort contracts VD that scars his good looks and disfigures his genitals beyond repair. 1768. Jean-Jacques Rousseau personally abandons all 5 of his newborns to a hospital for unwanted children. That's kind of like the male version of getting like 5 abortions, right? 1774, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, blah, 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 publishes The Sorrows of Young Werther, a tragic romance novel that causes dozens of young and heartbroken European men to commit suicide. 1784, Denis Diderot's wife burns love letters that her husband wrote to and received from his mistress, Sophie Voland. 1800, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel fathers an illegitimate child with his landlord's wife. Hegel leaves town rather quickly. Arthur Schopenhauer fathers a child with a maid in Dresden during a single night of passion. 1826, Auguste Comte throws knives at his wife and slits his own throat at the dinner table during a mental breakdown. His wife, tired of his moody antics, finally leaves him 16 years later. 1840, Henry David Thoreau's marriage proposal to Ellen Sewald is rejected. He gives up on love forever. 1841, Soren Kierkegaard breaks up with his fiancée of 13 months, Regine Olsen, to spare her from his existential angst. 1862, Leo Tolstoy shows his diaries to his bride on their wedding day, revealing his world of prostitutes, promiscuity, gonorrhea, and homoerotic thoughts in unflinching detail. 1868, Fyodor Dostoevsky pawns his wife's wedding ring to pay down his gambling debts. She eventually gets it back. 1872, Henry Ward Beecher, the most famous minister in America, is tried for adultery. He refuses to place his hand on the Bible and swear under oath, sealing his guilt in the court of public opinion. 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche has a severe psychotic breakdown and never regains his sanity. He dies in 1900 from complications of syphilis. 1895, on his deathbed, Friedrich Engels reveals that his suspected son was actually fathered by his friend and collaborator Karl Marx. 1921, Bertrand Russell divorces his first wife. 1928, Jean-Paul Sartre's engagement to Germaine Morand is broken by her parents after he fails his teaching exam. It doesn't bother Sartre much because he has been sleeping with actress Simone Jolivet. In 1933, Martin Heidegger joins the Nazi Party, or Heidegger, whatever. It's a double G. I don't know if that's soft or not. Despite the fact that his mistress Hannah Arendt is Jewish, she hightails it to America. 1935, Bertrand Russell divorces his second wife. 1942, Albert Camus divorces his first wife, Simone Hier, after discovering that she has been having sex with a doctor in exchange for morphine. 1952, Bertrand Russell divorces his third wife. 1952, John Dewey dies alone after his second wife alienates his friends and his family and friends. 1955, Ayn Rand begins an extramarital affair with a student, Nathaniel Brandon, who is 25 years her junior. 1980, Simone de Beauvoir adopts her lesbian lover, Sylvie Levant, as her daughter. In 1980, Louis Althusser accidentally strangles his wife in her sleep, and he spends less than 3 years in an institution before being released back into society. The end. We survived another book together. Alright. Well, that was fun. I did want to start this channel on the basis that I'm not here for happily ever afters. I'm not here for even stories that I always agree with or people that I always agree with. I'm here strictly for the sake of curiosity and learning and understanding. So if I read things that you disagree with, if I read things that you're like, oh, taboo, blah, 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 guess what? I don't fucking care. Okay, that's my content. That's what it is. And that's basically, bottom line, what I'm trying to present with this. Let's start with the unhappy endings, right? Let's start with the spooky goosebump stories, where, like, there's always, like, that cliffhanger at the end where the ending might not be that happy. So, like, yeah, I do like books that are more realistic, and that's not to say that I don't believe in happy endings. I do. In fact, Wizard of Oz is on my list too. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna present a pretty balanced and realistic amount of all of it. Everything I can really, bring to the table here. So anyway, now that I've done all this talking, I've got to go do some smoking. Namaste. I love you guys. I'll catch you on the next one.